Hello and welcome to another episode of Ringside Fracas. I'm your host, Naeem, and today we've got a special episode for you today. Like I said last week, we're going to keep the specials coming. And of course, what a great episode to have when we have, Sky Sports boxing commentator, analyst, the Ring Magazine Pundit, and one of the known voices of boxing. When you're watching a boxing fight, it's most likely you're going to hear his voice and his analysis going on. And the author of the new book, The Knockout, Mr. Andy Clarke. Andy, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I mean, that's such a long list of accomplishments that you had in boxing. One can only dream, especially when wanting to cover the sport. How's it been in the last, does it feel surreal to see where you are from the beginning?
It does. It does sometimes. I started in broadcasting in 2000 and the world was very different then. The landscape was incredibly different, really. I wouldn't say that most people weren't online, but at the same time, an awful lot more then weren't than are now. The internet was still relatively new. Not everybody had a phone, which will seem absolutely insane to a lot of people now. There was no digital platform. There was no social media. So things were really different. And when I started, you really had to learn how to do the job first, and you covered what you were told to. Basically, you needed to get into a newsroom somewhere. I started through radio. That's what almost everybody I know did, and you kind of took it from there if you were on the broadcast side, and you learned how to do the job, and you went and covered whatever you were told to do. And it was only after about 10 years that I thought, okay, I'll see if I can now segue into boxing, because up until that point, I'd mainly done football because I was working at TalkSport, and that's the kind of lifeblood of the station. And I really enjoyed it. But I always wanted to work in boxing. But I probably wouldn't have anticipated early days when I was kind of deciding or hoping that I might do certain things. I probably wouldn't have imagined possibly being where I am now. But I've always been an optimist. I've always believed that if you stick at something and you have some luck, then you never know what might happen. And boxing's definitely that kind of space, because it is quite small and strange things happen. And it's a bit like in the heavyweight division where you're only ever one big win away from a really big fight. You're quite close to a big seat if you get yourself on the inside. And yeah, it's but it's a good point, because I do still sometimes, you look at last week, for example, and you've got this crazy card in Saudi Arabia, and I've been there so much now, and that's like the third undisputed fight I've commentated on in 9 months or something like that. And you should always just have a look around and just think, wow, this is great. I love this. You should never take it for granted or feel like you've seen it all before, because certainly in our sport, you definitely haven't seen it all before. Yeah. You definitely haven't. But I am aware of the fact that, yeah, I have put the work in. I have done that, but I'm aware of the fact that I've also had luck, and you need luck, and you just need to be just aware of it. I'm not one for posting loads on social media and talking about how thankful and grateful and blessed I am and all that kind of thing. I'm quite private, really, but I'm aware of it, and you have to be, I think.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of big things, one thing that I think is quite big, especially for boxing, I've always found the coverage of boxing as well is important to the sport, because of how you present the sport, especially to people that aren't involved. And one big thing that you've done is write the book called The Knockout, which is a great book. The Knockout, right here, got one copy as well. Reading it, I'm loving the read. Also, the link to the Amazon is in the description below, so make sure you catch a copy, especially if you like boxing. Like for me, reading the book, I'm quite enthralled by it, because you're relating it to fights that I've watched, like for example Froch and Groves. I've watched back, I didn't watch it live at the time, but Moore and Macklin, Buster Douglas and Tyson, you're picking out these big moments, but you're also talking about knockout, which one thing which I loved when you started off the book with was the fact that there's nothing like it in sport. Like in any other sport, there's nothing like the knockout. Like you play football, for example, And if a team is winning 5-0, there's no other way for the other team to win with 1 goal in the last minute. But in boxing, you could be losing all 12 rounds and you're literally down to the last 10 seconds and you manage to get the knockout and you've won, you've taken victory then. And like you say on the cover of the book, it's the sport's most decisive moment. There is no bigger moment in all of sport. And there's no more, and it involves such a variety of emotions because you don't know how to feel. Like, especially when I'm watching boxing, like, I think one of the biggest reactions that I had recently was probably Anthony Joshua and Ngannou, because I used to watch Ngannou in UFC, and I never could have imagined that he would get laid out, legs bent backwards, 1 punch knockout. One of the hardest knockouts I think I've seen from a heavyweight at that time. And part of it's ecstatic because you're excited, but like you've also said, then there's that moment that clicks in where you start to worry about the other fighter and you start to worry about their health and hopefully they get up. With such a big topic, what inspired you to write about the knockout?
Boxing is just such an amazing sport in so many different ways. And right at the top of that is the knockout, because as you said there, it doesn't exist in other sports, this singular moment that can just change everything and turn everything around. And then when you think about it more, you realize that although we do celebrate it when we see one and then can immediately feel guilty that we've seen one, it is the ultimate aim. It's what fighters are trying to do. They're trying to knock each other out because you take it out of the judge's hands and you've won. But what does that feel like? That's what I began to think about more as I covered the sport. Is that joy? Is that relief that it's not you? Is that just the game you're in? Are you afraid of it happening to you? How does that work? Because in the time that I've been following sport, I think quite an interesting thing has happened when it comes to athletes' attitudes towards winning and losing. I'm pretty sure that post kind of 2000 in the noughties, it seemed to become more prevalent, this idea that almost like celebrating was for losers, because if you celebrated, then that was because you didn't expect to win, and you should always expect to win, and on to the next thing. You've got to be super focused and all that kind of thing. And it just made me think that maybe being a professional athlete isn't all it's cracked up to be. Like, maybe it's not that much fun. Like, what is winning actually like when you're at the highest level, when the stakes are high, when you expect to win and everybody expects you to win? And it is quite a confusing thing. And there's nothing more confusing, I wouldn't have thought, than winning by knockout, because you've just done to them the thing that you least want to happen to you, not just because it means you've lost, but because it means that you have been rendered unconscious in front of a crowd of people and potentially a vast TV audience. And what does that do to your ego? It's the ultimate form of victory and defeat. So the stakes with it are just ludicrously high. And then you've got other people involved in it. You've got trainers who are training fighters to try and inflict one, but part of their job is to try and make sure it doesn't happen to them. But you can never really make sure that it doesn't happen to them. And you've got to put them in danger. Sometimes you might send them back out there knowing there's a chance that they could get knocked out, but it's just that stage of the fight. One person's going to go and you don't think it's necessarily going to be your guy, but it could be. And then you've got referees as well, who sometimes they just have to kind of let it happen, because sometimes a knockout is a natural conclusion to a fight. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought it's just this spectacular thing that you don't have in other sports. And it sets our athletes aside from others as well, I think, because they have to come to terms with this. They have to be okay with it. At any weight, that's what they're trying to do. But particularly as you go higher up in weights, you have to find a way to be okay with the fact that you're going to try and knock him out. He's going to try and knock you out. Maybe one of you will manage it. Maybe it'll go to points. But it's just something you have to get used to. The whole thing, the more I kind of looked into it, the more obsessed I got with it, which was great, because I've spoken to friends who'd written books before, and they said that sometimes they get halfway through and realize that maybe this wasn't as interesting as they thought it was. And that's a struggle then, I think. But not with this. It was just it was a case of what do I leave out, not what do I put in. There was quite a lot of stuff that didn't make it. And I really would like to revisit it in 10, 15 years' time and see if I've learned anything, and see where some of these careers have gone from of the active fighters I spoke to. There weren't many, because active fighters, it's not something that people generally want to talk about, particularly if they have been knocked out. Mm-hmm. Anthony Yard was great, and he's been stopped, but he hasn't been knocked out. Mm-hmm. And Fabio Wardi was great on it as well. I mean, obviously he's never lost ever, amateur or pro, but white collar or pro. But he was good on, what about the fear of losing? And in the heavyweight division, that probably means you're going to be knocked out.
Yeah.
A really, really long answer. But it was just so, I had so much fun with it. I loved it. I loved it all.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of, you talk about the referees, especially, like, I mean, I think one of the important things, and it's quite a point of contention, especially when you have more eyes on fights nowadays, where fighter safety comes into kind of effect of when is the right time to pull a fighter out. When should one part I was reading about the book was when should a referee, just stop the fight, and when should a referee not stop the fight and think that they should come back? Because there are some fighters who will describe in their experience that they were knocked out for a second, then somehow they just get back up and get straight back to fighting. But fighter safety is quite key in these moments because of what happens, especially like the fact that you went and talked to Dr. Neil, who was the advisor with the British Boxing Board of Control, and he kind of explained what happens to the brain and how important these things are. Your thoughts on kind of fighter safety, especially in the last couple of years when it comes to how referees and corners as well. There's many times where, for example, I think one fight that comes to mind especially was, it's not famous, but Bohachuk and Mendoza on the Sue Fundora undercard. Bohachuk was really beating him up, and I thought there's not really a way back for Mendoza. He's a big puncher. There wasn't really a way back from him, and he was getting punched. He was getting the life beaten out of him almost. I mean, but he's not the type of guy to go down. There are some guys who are just harder to knock down. But those are the ones that are more scarier because they're holding much more damage than a normal knockout would, because a knockout's fast and quick. But the referee wasn't really getting involved, and the corner was happy to let him go. What's your thoughts on kind of how fighter safety has been in the last couple of years when it comes to boxing?
I think it's inconsistent. I think you speak to people like Neil, and I know that the British scene is in good hands with people like him around, because he's very keen to educate people on it and explain to people exactly what's happening, whilst completely understanding that boxing is boxing, and you could never try and take the knockout away, because then the sport just wouldn't be anything like the one we've always known. It can never be completely safe, boxing. It just can't, but you can try and make it safer. And there's nothing that frustrates me more than when I see an incompetent corner, frankly, when they are watching a fight and they are not computing what is actually happening. They're somehow hoping that their fighter's going to find a way back in based on no evidence, and somehow hope that they're going to land this Hail Mary punch based on no evidence, and just sending them back out there and sending them back out there. I absolutely hate it. And I think corner performances should be scrutinized by sanctioning bodies and jurisdictions and commissions all over the world, much, much more than they actually are. And licenses should be under threat if people prove themselves not to be capable of making a decision which is really obvious to everybody else. Sometimes it's not obvious. Sometimes it's not. And sometimes I've been sitting there thinking to myself, he should stop this. And then they haven't, and the fighters come back. But sometimes you watch something and it's just really obvious that there is no way back. They've lost every round. They cannot win, or they've been badly hurt. They cannot win. And in those circumstances, there is no excuse. There is no explanation for that. And what it will be is it will be people with a very old school bullshit macho attitude of, this is boxing, it's a hurt game, and all that absolute nonsense. And they should have no place in the sport, and they need to be weeded out, because that's how people really get hurt. Referees, I think, in general, are really pretty good. because I mean, most of the referees I see are British, but I don't remember seeing a referee let one go on too long on a fight I've covered for quite a long time, actually, which is good. Which is good. They do generally tend to let it go longer in America than they do here, but at the same time, referees will want to give fighters every chance, particularly the bigger the fight is, because this is what they've chosen to do. This is how they make their living. It can have a big impact. But anybody who exhibits that level of incompetence where there was a clear and obvious decision that should have been made, and yet somehow they didn't see it, something needs to be done about them.
Yeah, I remember in the book as well, and everyone knows this kind of, especially if you're clued up in boxing, that how vast boxing is, but inconsistent because of the amount of sanctioning bodies and organizations, and every organization has different sets of rules, and there's nothing kind of unified. It's quite jarring, especially if you're a casual fan that's not really clued up on this. You're kind of in your head thinking, well, football, everything has kind of a unified rule, and tennis has a unified rule, whereas boxing kind of doesn't. It depends on where you are and where you are fighting, and it's quite frustrating at times to see, like you say, when it comes to certain referees or certain corners, that it's criminal negligence, if anything, the way they're sending.
Yeah, I mean, it pretty much is, and as you say, that is the problem, because if you had your license suspended in a state in America, is that unless you have a lot of fighters and you're a big name trainer and it's Nevada, then it's not really going to have any effect on you. No. It could have an effect in this country if you're a UK based trainer and that's where basically all your pro fights take place, and you had your license suspended. That could have an effect on you. But mostly, as you say, because there's no overarching, because nobody's an overall charge, there's ways around things, and that is one of the main problems with you could argue with kind of almost everything, really.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I really enjoy this book, because I think it does highlight those inconsistencies. It highlights how important the knockout is, and also educates not just people that are involved, because there's some people who are involved in boxing who won't know certain things in this book about the knockout, and also the casual fans that want to know more about this sport. It brings more awareness to these type of things, which is quite good, and we appreciate the fact that you've written this book and put it out there. What's the reception been like since it's been released and published?
It's been good. It's been good. I've had quite a lot of people come up to me at events and shows and asked me to sign it and said that they've enjoyed it. I really enjoyed writing it, and when that's the case, and you're genuinely proud of something, I like to think I'm quite pragmatic and realistic, and if I thought it was good and a worthy subject and that I'd handled it well, then I'm kind of happy, because I'm objective about things. I live in the real world, so I did expect I was hoping people would enjoy it. I didn't think it was going to take the literary world by storm, but it is an interesting subject, and it's not one that anybody has really covered. To my surprise, when I looked into it, it's not one that anybody had really covered. I could tell when I spoke to fighters, when I wanted to know what did that feel like in the actual moment, what do you remember in the actual moment, that no one had really asked them that before. They'd asked them about the aftermath, what does it feel like to win and, get the belt and go on holiday or whatever. But no one had really asked them in that split second moment when it's all happened for you, what does it feel like? It's a kind of very basic human thing, isn't it? So it's been good. Yeah, it's been good. And it quite suited me as a discipline, I think. So I'm hoping to do something else, fairly soon, maybe. You just have to think of you just have to think of a good idea. It's hard to think of something that is going to sustain your interest in the way that a subject needs to, if you're going to commit to really putting the graft in and writing a book. I don't expect there are many. I don't expect there are many more subjects out there that I'll find like it, because I'm not really. It would have to be that kind of thing. I don't see myself writing a kind of more historical book. I don't see myself doing that. So, yeah, I'm just really glad I did it.
That's a fantastic book, and like I said, if you're a boxing fan, you should really buy this book and have a read through it, because it will give you more of an insight into the sport, more of insight into the fighters, especially some of the fighters involved that are giving their accounts. Like, for example, Matthew Macklin. You've got also Teddy Atlas giving his account. You're getting not just from a fighter's perspective, but also a trainer's perspective as well. So, the link is in the bio. Make sure you go and buy that from Amazon. But we're talking about the knockout. I think I've got to ask you, especially because of how long you've been involved in boxing as a fan and also in the media. I'm going to subcategorize this one, so you're able to pick two. What's your most memorable knockout, live, being there, calling the fight, and on TV, meaning you've watched it live?
So the most memorable one, there's a few actually. You mentioned AJ Ngannou earlier on, and that is one of my favorites because just the pure mechanics of it. He'd been down a couple of times, he was banging trouble, and Joshua just stepped in, feet exactly where they needed to be. Everything was to the millimeter. The weight transfer, everything was just perfect, and he just cleaned him out and knocked him out cold. It was so brutal and clinical, and then the kind of matter-of-fact turnaround and walk back to the corner. That, for me, in a way, was exactly what it's about. Because it was great to watch, but also kind of horrendous to see someone like you said, someone like Ngannou reduced to that state. He would never have imagined that could happen to him. He came to the press conference afterwards, and that came too late to make it into the book. But as he was coming to the press conference, I'd heard that he was coming. I was working on the stream with Dev Sani, and I said, I'm hearing that Ngannou's going to make an appearance. He shouldn't really, because he won't really have processed yet exactly what's happened. He'll know what's happened, and he'll feel like he remembers it probably, but actually he won't, because you can't. People will insert memories after the event, but they can't remember getting knocked unconscious. That's just physiologically, neurologically impossible. But they feel like they do, because very quickly they'll insert their own memory of what happened, because a blank space doesn't really work. It sort of freaks people out, which is completely understandable. And there he was. And I was looking at him just thinking, Christ, like, what are you doing here, given what's happened to you a few hours ago? So seeing that one really soon after I'd finished writing, in the flesh, and then seeing the aftermath, kind of personally for me, for those reasons, probably that one. Callum Smith has delivered a couple of absolute crackers, shockers, whichever way you look at it, right in front of me. One was Luke Blackledge, a left hook, and one was Lennon Castillo at Tottenham Hotspur. And that features in the book because Castillo was just flattened and he's lying there and his legs twitching, and it was bad, and that was the full horror, the stadium fight, pretty good crowd in at that point. Everybody's completely intoxicated by the knockout, and then particularly if you were a way up, you're then working out that this guy could be dying right in front of your eyes. I mean, that it's kind of an interesting one, isn't it? Because best knockout, the best ones are kind of the worst ones in a way. But the best one, I think, actually. So I'll take AJ Ngannou for the one that I saw live. Watching on TV, Froch Groves. Froch Groves is, as I kind of put it in the book, it is the perfect knockout for so many reasons, because stage, spectacle, scale of the event, Froch's final punch, the rivalry, all of that. It was a great, great shot. George got flattened, but then he got back up. And so everybody could see that he was okay. So it was it was wholesome almost. Wembley Stadium, all eyes on boxing, which we hadn't had for a while, actually, because pay-per-view had been away for a while, then come back with Froch Kessler, and boxing had been kind of in the doldrums a bit until London 2012, but we were waiting for all of them to really come through. And to have that moment go around the world was just great for the sport. It would have been bad for the sport if George Groves had not got up and he'd ended up with a brain injury. That would have been terrible. But as it was, it just couldn't have been better. People kind of forget, really, that he was up by before Charlie Fitch would have got to 10. He suspended the count bit, but he was up. Their powers of recovery are absolutely incredible, and that's one of the things with referees and medics, but particularly referees. They need to really be able to tell when someone's been knocked out, because it might happen for a split second, but if they have been, then it's over. It doesn't matter if they're back on their feet, because what you can have, and what will have happened in years gone by, definitely, is you will have got a fighter knocked out twice on the same night. So they get knocked out once, come round, get up, referee lets them go on, and they get knocked out again. And that's just understandably, unsurprisingly, very, very bad for you. So it's those two. It's those two.
Those are two good picks. I mean, I was going to pick as well Lenin Castillo and Callum Smith, because I was there live, and like you said, I was in the Rosette with my tickets.
So what was that like then? Because what did you see, and what was your kind of reaction? What was your chain of events with it? Kind of emotionally, if you can remember.
Like, what I was doing was like splitting my time between looking down at the ring and then also looking at the screen, because it's easier to see certain things on the screen. It was a brilliant knockout, and there was ecstasy because of how hard the knockout was, with a clean right hand, and everyone around us was like, "Oh," because it kind of everything livened up. And then I think before that, it was Lawrence Okoli getting a body shot knockout. I think,
quick one, wasn't it?
Yeah,
bit of a mismatch.
Yeah, and then before that, it was Marku going the distance, winning. So that kind of livened things up when it was it wasn't just a body shot; it was a proper right hand to the head knockout. But in that split second, it didn't erupt as much as you expected, because the camera was still on Castillo, and because his legs were shaking. I remember everyone around us, it got quiet.
I remember that.
You were just wondering, like, okay, this is clearly bad, because it seems like he's having a seizure, and so everyone was kind of waiting to hear back. I think we didn't get any updates up there until 10-15 minutes later, when someone saw online that around us that he was okay, and they took him.
But even at that point, they don't even know that, because we always have to be careful with that, because with that one, they got the stretcher in, they removed the bottom rope, got the oxygen in, doctors looked at him, got him onto the stretcher, got him onto the gurney, and took him away. And at that point, that's really all you know. And people think, "Oh, he's great. Look, he was sitting up and breathing." That doesn't mean all that much. There could still be a lot wrong. As it turned out, there wasn't. But then, of course, we have this situation where they put the bottom rope back in, brush the canvas. The show must go on.
Yeah.
And then we've got a couple of heavyweights coming in, and we're all hoping for a knockout. It's it's that one, I think, because it was an undercard knockout on a massive show, that did kind of, I wouldn't say remind me of the Coliseum, because it's not like I was ever there, but it's just someone gets dragged off. They kind of kick the sand around, so you can't really see the blood, and then some more come in. That's kind of how that felt to me a little bit. But that's, again, I don't get squeamish about it, because that's the sport. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, to me, that the memorable part was more of the reaction, because you normally expect after a knockout eruption and crowd cheering, but it just went quiet. And even Callum Smith himself stopped celebrating. I think he was just on the ropes, just waiting and hoping that Castillo was okay, because you couldn't really celebrate. You were so worried that that he was having a seizure, it seemed like. So that's why it sticks in my head a lot.
No, me too. It was a long time before I saw it again, actually. I never, like I say, I'm not very emotional, and I made my piece of boxing ages ago. I've never really had that crisis of conscience of should I like this? It's never really happened with me, and that's just, there's no real reason for it. I don't think. It's just quite different. People are different, but I didn't go looking for a replay of that. Because I knew that Sky didn't show it again on the night, and that they wouldn't put it out. But at some point, it probably would emerge. And then I actually did watch it for the book, and it was probably the one that I remember best, because what I found was that even with ones that when I was there, as well as ones that I watched on TV, when I watched them back, they weren't quite how I remembered them. But that one was exactly how I remembered it. which I was kind of surprised by, because the human memory is a really pretty imperfect thing. And that was an interesting thing about doing this. Yeah, not just if you've been knocked unconscious, of course, you're not going to remember anything about that, but just what people remember and what they choose to remember. And even what I've kind of chosen to remember about some of the things I've seen. I don't think there's anything necessarily behind it particularly, but it is kind of interesting. But that one was just kind of emblazoned on my brain, and exactly what I remember was exactly what happened.
Yeah, no, that was such a crazy knockout. I mean, yeah, it just sticks in your head. But the next question, in terms of crazy knockouts, what do you think, to you, covering the sport, is like, you've seen, you know, so many fights throughout your career, what's the most important knockout you've ever seen?
I mean, I always stick roughly to my viewing lifetime, although I'll go before it for one of them. I do think the Rumble in the Jungle was an absolutely cataclysmic knockout. Yeah. It's such an iconic sporting event, obviously, but people remember, obviously, that Ali won, and that's mainly what they remember. But the fact that he knocked him out and the way he went down, you know, when you look at these things, that's a big knockout. You know, that's a big knockout. Really was. Foreman again against Michael Moorer, you know, that I love that knockout, because it just seemed impossible that he could come back and do that. And Moorer was a good fighter, really was.
Yeah.
So there was nothing kind of cheap about the world titles that Foreman ended up winning back all those years later. And every time I see that one, every time I watch that fight, and I've watched it a few times, he's ahead, Michael Moorer, and he's doing what he needs to do. And you know this car crash for him is coming, and you're thinking, just keep doing what you're doing, keep doing what you're doing. But then all of a sudden, he's just slowed his feet down a bit, and he's standing in front of Foreman, and then it's over.
Yeah,
and then it's over. And that's a good example, because he was kind of out of sight on two of the cards, basically. So that's what he needed. He needed a knockout, and he supplied it. Buster Douglas, Mike Tyson, you know, that's an incredibly dramatic one, and had big repercussions for the sport. Just that image again of Tyson just on his knees, fumbling around, looking for his gum shield, desperately trying to get up, even though he doesn't really know what's happening. Because he asked his corner, on you know, when he got back, you know, what happened, and they had to tell him, you got knocked out, Mike. And you say, how does he not know that? Because he seems like he's conscious. Well, he is, because he's on his feet, he's getting up. But yeah, I think it's probably those. It's knockouts like that. There are loads more than you think, because I thought before I did this that they were probably quite rare, but they're not actually. They happen all the time. What about you?
Mine would probably be Ali and I mean, I wasn't there to watch it live, but mine would be Ali Foreman, because of the fact that Foreman is such a big. Foreman such a big. At that time, it seemed like trajectory-wise, he'd be so a proper force. But also one that sticks to mind, not probably most important compared to this one, but Conlon and Wood. That was really important for Wood's career, because he needed to win that.
That was a really dramatic late knockout, really dramatic. And you see what's happened to Michael Conlon since then. It's just not, you know, he's been knocked out a couple more times since, and it looks unlikely that he'll get there in terms of becoming a world champion. And he was so close. He was so close, and that's how decisive it can be, because it doesn't just turn a fight around. Sometimes it can have a massive effect on someone's career, both ways. Like you say, Lee Wood keeps the title, kicks on, has done what he's done. And for Michael, it's kind of gone in the opposite direction. It can be, that split second can change kind of everything forever, without wishing to be too melodramatic about it, but it can. So that's a good pick, that actually, of recent ones. That's a real good one.
Yeah, I think there's a couple more, like Ashton Sylvie getting knocked out. That's one that sticks to mind from last year, because he was winning on all the cards, and again, he's someone that he was getting backed by a big promoter. And Lucas Bahti wasn't really getting much. He's one of those guys that really winning, but not got the biggest promotion behind him, losing all the rounds, and then that left hook combination that just literally flattened him. That was quite good as well. So
yeah, that was savage, that one. Oh, another. I don't know if this had like a massive effect on kind of the world scene, but Pacquiao Marquez, just because as soon as he landed, it was one of those ones where he'd just been switched off. All the tensile strength left his body, and he just went straight on his face.
Yeah,
it's amazing what happens to the human body when someone gets knocked unconscious, and before they're like in midair, like as soon as it lands, bang, they're out, and then they fall to the canvas, and this kind of like gravity takes over, and they just end up kind of lying all sort of neatly, like stretched out on their back. And it happened to Hatton against Pacquiao.
Yeah,
exactly the same thing with Amir against Canelo. It's it's just a wild old scene because this incredibly violent thing has just happened, but the fighter's lying on their back, and usually they're not cut and there's no blood, and they just look incredibly peaceful.
Yeah,
it's I mean, we could talk about this all day. I mean, it is just it's a crazy thing when you think about it.
Yeah,
and I've thought about it way too much as well.
Yeah, the one that hurt me the most as a kid was probably watching Garcia knock out Khan, because back then I was into boxing, but not as much as I have been in the last like 10 years. But when that happened, I was so annoyed because it's just that no look left hook that you think as a boxer you should be watching out for that, and he just didn't.
I know. I remember that really well, actually. I remember that really well because I was about 2 years into kind of working on boxing at that point, and I've been doing some stuff at Sky, and they got Amir back on Sky, and it was a really big thing. And he shouldn't have lost to Lamont Peterson in Washington. I don't know why he took that fight in Washington. I don't know. There's all sorts of things went on around that. Peterson's a really good fighter, but Amir Khan should have beaten him. That should never have happened. And then obviously the rematch didn't happen. And then he gets a fight with Garcia, and you think, great, he can get back on track. And I thought he would beat Garcia, but that was Amir, wasn't it? He was that was what was so great about him, was that he was just, you never knew. Well, watching his fights was a nerve-wracking experience. Even when he was boxing really well, it was a nerve-wracking experience. Yeah, no, I loved him. Absolutely loved him.
And one of the things, especially throughout the years, what I've been quite interested in is also boxing media, like I said, the coverage when it comes to the sport. What have you noticed since the time that you started and now, the kind of changes over the decades? Like, for example, the introduction of Twitter. Now you've got these big boxing pages, for example, like Everything Boxing, covering news, putting out news before promoters even put it out. Or you've got YouTube channels now that IFL, for example, started. Now you've got so many different interview channels covering so many different aspects of the sport. What's your kind of takes on how boxing media has changed, and what's your thoughts on where it currently is at the moment?
I mean, it's changed beyond all recognition, really, because when I was watching it, when I was like in my teens and whatever, before I started working in the industry, you get a couple of fights. You get 2 or 3 fights maybe, and then you would only see the undercard if the main fights went short, and they would play in some of the undercard. When I started doing some stuff for Sky in 2011, that was still the setup. So it's relatively recently that you will just get everything now. Like Sky will stick it on Facebook and then go onto the main channel. DAZN will show everything. Everybody shows everything. So the amount of boxing you can watch now is absolutely tremendous. It's unbelievable, really. And that is a great thing, because the way people view stuff has completely changed. It's long gone the age of just terrestrial channels, and it's very boring when people talk about viewing figures from the 1980s and 1990s, because they're just not relevant to now, because then there were just a handful of channels, and of course, if you like, 15 million or however many people watch Benn Eubank, because it was a massive rivalry and everybody knew about it, and it was on ITV on a Sunday night, and there was you'd cornered the market. It's not like that now. It's not like that now. People need to get over that, to be honest, because it doesn't mean that boxing isn't a big sport, that we don't get those kinds of numbers anymore, because we do still pull in a massive audience for big fights, a floating kind of casual audience that other sports do not have. Now, football's the king, and we all know that. But other sports are not capable of doing what we can do. And we need to give ourselves a bit of a break sometimes, I think. And the amount that we get to watch is absolutely sensational. It really, really is. And the way that it's covered has changed as well, because when I started, like in 2000, just my career, basically, there was no digital platform. And the digital platform for the broadcast side kind of opens up this infinite space. Whereas I was operating out of a radio station, working for TalkSport, and if you got sent to a press conference to cover something, which was generally football, which is quite hard work actually, because there'd be loads of you there, and you wouldn't get one-on-ones. You'd just be in a big scrum trying to get some questions in. Airtime was incredibly valuable, so you had to get to the point really quickly. You couldn't mess around. You had to really editorialize in your head as to what you wanted to ask, how you were going to ask it. Maybe they wouldn't like it, but you needed to go there quick, and kind of react, that kind of thing. And I'd say that's the kind of the main difference now, is that there is so much space for stuff that maybe people aren't, and this isn't their fault because they're not really being taught to do it. Maybe people aren't thinking editorially anymore in the way that they used to, kind of journalistically anymore in the way that they used to, because they're a knowledgeable crowd, the YouTube journalists. And I don't really distinguish between the two. We're all doing the same thing. People talk about what's TV. If it's on a screen, it's TV. You can talk about different production values and all the rest of it. But, if it's on a screen now, the way people watch stuff, it's TV. But I guess that's one thing that I've noticed as being different from when I came through. You would never get 15 minutes with anyone ever. You might get 5 if you were lucky, and you had to make those 5 count. Now, I understand if everybody's going to do 10, 15 minutes, then of course you'll do the same thing, because whoever's in charge of you is going to say, what happened there? Now, they've got 15, 20 minutes. They covered all this stuff and you've only got 5. But I think if I had to give a tip to anyone on, coming through, I would say that would be it. Just like really think about what it is that you want to get to and what it is that you want to ask. Because I just think across the board, really, that maybe is being lost slightly. And you'll enjoy it more too if you do that, I promise you, because I'm sure for the journalists as well as the fighters, sometimes things can get a bit samey if you're doing the same interview over and over and over again. But at the same time, you need to do what gets you the views, the ratings. That's always been what it's about, whether it's kind of like old school TV, radio, whatever it is. But we're very welcoming in boxing. We press credentials are not as difficult to get as they are in other sports, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But just always try and keep what you're doing fresh as you can, because it'll be more fun. I think that's pretty much it, really.
Yeah, I'm noting all this for the future, because it's part of the podcast. Is like one of the things that we try to aim to do is, we talk with our friends as well, but when we bring on boxers, like we've had Denzel Bentley on, we've had Anthony on, we've had Dan Aziz on, we've had Chris Congo on. Yes, the aim more is not to be another interview style. It's more to just get the fighter and the fan closer by asking relevant questions, but asking also questions that just are more relatable and are not the same that you get a lot of the times. So
no, that word you used there, that's bang on. Relatable is the thing, because fighters are very relatable, I think. And it's what I found is that people are always kind of, and I get it, and sometimes it works really well. People are always looking to kind of do something wacky. We had loads of it last week, and we have loads of it in fight weeks. And I get it, because they're doing lots of the same interviews, and you can try and get them to do something a little bit fun, play a game, that kind of thing. And some of them are up for it, some of them aren't. And if they're not, you just need to read the room a little bit and just say, actually, if I look on his face, I don't think he's really going to be keen on this. And that stuff can work really well. But something that always works well, if somebody's agreed to give you their time, is if you've done your research and you know about them, and you can ask them some proper questions. And that kind of a good way in is always to ask somebody something, or your first couple, if you've got a bit of time, that just lets them know that you've taken this seriously and you've done your research and you know about their career and you know about them, because that immediately turns people on, because everybody's got an ego and they're sitting in front of somebody and then where they just think, oh, okay, so you do know. That's how you get good stuff, and that'll never change. That'll always be the case.
Yeah, and that's what we hope to do, and that's what we hope to continue doing, especially with this, is kind of like get as boxers on, but not in an interview format, just a way to talk about their career, talk about their life, but not the same question. Oh, when's the next one? That's kind of the same kind of question that they always get, but kind of, what did you experience in this fight? Like one thing that I took away from the Denzel Bentley interview, for example, was what was the experience like being in there with Janibek, and also the experience of fighting for a world title in a way that it's not normally, because he wasn't meant to fight for the world title. It was kind of, oh, here's the shot because no one else kind of wants to fight Janibek. It wasn't the normal organic way that you think about it. And it was quite interesting taking those, hearing him, the fact that he thought he heard Janibek get hurt by him, and the kind of insights that you get are quite interesting from boxers. So yeah,
if you take them into the ring and kind of really prod them, sometimes because they're not used to it, they don't really know what you want, and they'll go into a bit of a default setting of, well, it was a hard fight, and it's like, no, I don't mean that. I mean what you were just talking about there, just really getting into the bones of it, because I don't think people really do that much. Because that for me is what it's about, really. I've never boxed properly, and I'm not going to start now. And even if I did, you're not going to recreate anything like the level or the kind of jeopardy that they experience. What is that like?
Well, you never know. You might get a Jake Paul fight. You never know.
But I asked Bivol last week. I like, Bivol, he's perfectly happy to talk about stuff. He doesn't, you can't ask him for a prediction, because top level guys, they will happily admit they don't know what's going to happen when the bell goes, because nobody does. Anyone who says they do is lying. But we all understand why people say this, that, and the other. And the social media guys from the ring said, can you think of like anything kind of different to ask him? And I said, Bivol's not really a guy for this kind of stuff. And I said, but if you want, I could just ask him, what did it feel like to get punched hard in the face by Artur Beterbiev? And I asked him, and he kind of laughed and thought really hard about it. And then just said, at the time, I didn't really feel it. And you just think, wow, okay, that's kind of interesting, because I'd imagine you would. I really would have thought that you would.
Yeah. I mean, I'm surprised he said that, but he's also said that, and he said that again as well. Like he mentions that the power's not kind of what everyone.
Yeah, I believe him though. I do believe him. I think you're that zoned in that you probably don't feel it.
Yeah. And speaking of big things, kind of this year, the Ring Magazine has kind of relaunched, and you are part of the Ring Magazine as a pundit, and also you've got your own podcast as well. And also you've been doing sit-down interviews with multiple boxers, and you've also got the Ring Magazine mug at the back over there.
Yeah, I have. Yeah.
How's it been, this kind of change in the Ring Magazine? What you've kind of noticed since this relaunch, and the different things that we can kind of expect?
It's been good. It's been really fun. It's new still. They're trying quite a lot of different things out. The sit downs with fighters has been really enjoyable. The kind of 20-minute or so ones where you're getting into their lives and their careers rather than their next fight. I really enjoyed doing them. I did a 90-minute sit down with Roberto Duran last week, which, he's always been one of my favorites. So that was tremendous. I loved that. So I enjoy all of that stuff, because what I found with it so far is that they do trust you to do what it is that you do. They've kind of hired a load of us, and they want us to do what we've always done. That's why we're there. So you're not really given any hard and fast instructions. You're certainly not given any questions. You must ask this, or you must ask that, or you must say this, or you must say that. The only thing I've really been told by them expressly is, please do not constantly go on about the fact that Turki Al-Sheikh has bought the ring. Everybody knows. And don't go on endlessly about how great he is. That's not what this is. They want it to be independent, and it's been fun. It is fun, and the podcast is, I think we've done 3 so far. Me and Matt Macklin, we used to have our own one, which we did a lot of episodes, and then it kind of, the last couple of years we haven't done it a lot, to be honest. So when we got approached, we would bang up for it, because it's really, really good fun. It's really good fun. I love that format. Different people suit different things, and that suits me, I think. So we're looking forward to getting stuck into it for the rest of the year, and then see what happens after that. But they've got a lot of plans. I mean, they just announced today a show for May the 2nd in Times Square in New York, with a load of fighters on it. Haney Garcia, Teofimo Lopez. I mean, God only knows what that's going to look like. It's going to look great. I can tell you that for free. But that's the kind of thing we're getting now with the Ring Magazine putting on cards like Eubank Benn. It's a vehicle for them to put on big fight nights outside of Riyadh, because I think from now on, basically, Riyadh season means Riyadh season, and it will be in Riyadh. And my guess is, and this is a guess, but my guess is that fights of real global significance, that's where they'll be. But ones like Eubank Benn, for example, which isn't massively relevant to the world scene, but is a big, big fight here, they'll put it on. That's why they're happy to put it on here. So there's a lot more to come. I'm pretty confident about that.
Yeah, I mean, the format, the kind of things that they've come out with, and is quite different to what we normally get. Like, for example, obviously in the Last Crescendo, they had that kind of sit down between the fighters where they sat them all in the ring all together before their fights, and you had like Bivol and Better BM next to each other. I'm obviously not enthused to be sitting next to each other and ask questions, but
no, I think you've got to be a little bit careful with stuff like that you don't ask them to do too much stuff like that. But like I say, it's new and they're trying things out. But fighters during fight week, you don't want them too close to each other. They can kind of rub up against each other at press conferences and be a few seats apart, but putting them right next to each other, I think that's. I mean, we saw with Eubank and Benn the other day. It was premeditated from Eubank, obviously, but they're close enough to each other enough of the time that things can happen. And you don't want anything happening during fight week, because it'd only take just a fingernail to open up a cut somehow, and all of a sudden you've got a big problem.
Yeah, no. Speaking of Eubank versus Benn, I think we've got a couple minutes left, so I do want to talk about some of the fights and some of the things that have gone on the last week. I mean, it's been an interesting kind of week as the launch press conferences have happened for Eubank Benn, and of course you were there covering it. The first one was obviously the most iconic one to say, and it's the one that's drum up the most interest, where obviously Eubank ended the press conference in the face-off by slapping. First, everyone thought it was a slap, and then on replay, you saw that he cracked an egg on his face. What was your kind of initial reaction to that? How it unfolded?
Well, we like you said, we didn't know that it was an egg. I was there with Dave Coldwell and Sonny working for the Ring, and we were watching it in real time. We weren't watching it on the monitor, so they were probably about 20 yards away. And because the side of the face that he broke the egg on was the side of the face that we couldn't see, and it all happened so quickly, we didn't see that there was an egg involved. And nor did the lads working on DAZN either, actually. They only found out when Eddie Hearn told them, when he came up to the press stage. And we only found out when Ben Shalom came up and told us. And originally I thought, wow, this is kind of interesting. Like, Eubank's lost his rag here. Ben said something to him, he didn't like it, and he's done that. That's very un-Eubank, was my first reaction. Then you discover what's happened, and then you just think, right, well, this is kind of like the most Eubank thing ever, isn't it? It's gone full circle from feeling like he's lost the plot to thinking, no, this is premeditated. And I could understand why Team Ben were absolutely fuming, because it is, as Sonny described it, a liberty. But mostly they'll have been fuming because he got in there first, and you know that it's going to be hard for you to reply. Security did a great job, and then you know that 2 days later at the press conference, realistically, you're not going to be able to level the score, and that would be really annoying. And that's the thing I think that would have angered the most. Eddie was talking about, a bit of shell could have gone in his eye, and he's right, it could have, but it didn't. And actually, it was kind of funny. Not if you're Conor Benn. He's laid his hand on him, and that's a serious thing. And he'll be hearing from the Border Control about that. Probably get a fine, I'd imagine. But when you kind of like think about it more, just the kind of image of Eubank just like filling his pockets with eggs, kind of chuckling to himself earlier in the day, knowing that this was what he was going to do. I don't think many of the team knew. It's possible with him that nobody knew, that only he knew, because he wouldn't have wanted anything to kind of leak out. And then when you watch the footage back, knowing what he's about to do, it is clever, isn't it? The way he kind of like whispers in his ear, and then he puts his head on the left side, so Benn wouldn't have been able to see him putting his hand in his pocket, and then goes for him. It was very well executed, actually. And the whole thing, yeah, I mean, look at the ticket sales, look at the people queuing for pre-sale. He's kind of a genius, Eubank, to be honest with you, when it comes to selling fights. And that image, that clip just went absolutely everywhere. And the two press conferences, they don't like each other. It is authentic, and it gets quite close to the bone, and they don't hold back. But at the same time, I think they both kind of know where the line is in terms of nothing really distasteful has been said. There's been a few things you've heard and you wince, but it's not been anything that you couldn't repeat. There's been very little that you'd have to bleep, for example, or you think to yourself, well, we couldn't put that in a news bulletin. No, it's good. It's good. I can't wait for it. It's a hell of a stadium, that, as well. I've been there twice for boxing, luckily for me. And it's going to look, that is going to be some night. It's going to be some week, actually.
Yeah, I mean, initially when they first had the discussions about doing Eubank versus Benn, and this was back in 2022, my initial thoughts were probably, I'm not that interested in it, simply because it didn't make sense to me, other than the fact that they had both their fathers' names. One's a welterweight, the other one's a super middleweight, if we're being honest. But after all this controversy with obviously how the first fight went and how it didn't happen, how they kind of conduct themselves after that, and how they built it up, it's got my interest to the point where I think it has to happen, especially for UK boxing, because I've always been a big believer that for the sport to be healthy, especially in this country, you need a stadium fight probably once or twice a year, because it just, that buzz helps the sport as a whole. And I think this one will be another huge event. And even though, like I say, on paper, I'm not quite sold by it in terms of how the fight would look, I think it's drum up enough, like you say, it's drum up enough interest where there's so many people behind it now, and it's going to be such a massive event on April 26th. And the card itself isn't bad. I mean, you've got Billam Smith coming back against Brandon Glanton, which is a very left field fight, but it's quite a tough fight to come back from.
Yeah, it is.
And then you've also got Lyndon Arthur and Anthony Yard 3, which for me is a bit disappointing, because obviously we want to see Yard in with obviously Boatsi, and
it might surprise us though. I know people are a bit underwhelmed by that one, but sometimes it happens, doesn't it? You get a fight and no one's really expecting much, and then all of a sudden you get something. It's Vidal's on it as well, isn't he? Vidal Riley against Chev Clarke for the British, so that's a good one. But with this one, when it was first made, you get it obviously because of the surnames, but I just thought, for both of them, career-wise, this doesn't really work, because Conor at that stage was on the rise. He was flattening people, but he was a welterweight. Eubank had boxed at super middleweight, like you say, boxed at middleweight as well. It's 2.5 years ago. You're still thinking to yourself, he should be looking to win a world title. What's he kind of doing? This really is just about the money, but but that's it. It really is just about the money. Whereas now, because of what's happened, Benn really, really needs it. Now, I know he might have had an opportunity to fight for the WBC at welterweight. I'm not sure how, given the two fights he's had in America over the last couple of years. I don't know how he would be kind of in line for that, to be honest, but that's boxing. But he really needs this now. And for Eubank, he is nearing the end, I would say. And this makes complete sense for him too, because we've seen that he's been very consistent his whole career. He's gone for the biggest money fights. He could have fought Golovkin, but he didn't want to. And that's what happened. And I don't blame him, but that's what happened. Because, yes, that would have been a lot of money probably, but it would also have been probably pretty horrendous, to be honest, because Golovkin's absolutely, like, he's one of my favourites. So now it makes a lot more sense than it did then. And it's got the added backstory, whether people like it or not. And the way all of that happened the first time around and the fallout, you know, it was bad. It was bad, but we are where we are. And it's going to be packed out at Spurs on April the 26th. And I think it will do really well on pay-per-view. They're having a lot more problems on pay-per-view now with piracy than they ever used to have. So that's another reason why figures are not the same anymore. But I think that one will sell well. And I think it will just spill over into the mainstream pretty much for most of that week, in a way that fights don't normally.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited for, and like I say, when stuff happens in fight build-up, it just, even if you're not the biggest fan of a fight, it just makes you intrigued so much to see what happens. Especially like you said, the fight week is going to be very interesting to see how they conduct all the interviews and the grand arrivals and the kind of the workouts and all of that. But yeah, it's going to be a huge event. I mean, while we've got a couple minutes left, I thought I might as well just ask how last weekend went for you, because of course one of the biggest fight cards, one of the best fight cards in all of boxing history. Of course, if you've been watching some of the older cards, then it is quite arguable. But it was a great card. It's one of the best cards we've had in quite a while. With Better Be of Bivol being the main event, and of course you've had so many title fights, 7 of them, that, you know, from 3 p.m. up until 12 a.m. for us here. How did you find that event as a whole?
I loved it. It was a really, really good week. Just so much happened. You know, Floyd Schofield pulling out and Josh Padley coming in was a great story. Then, of course, you had the bombshell on the Thursday that Dubois was struggling and Martin Bacoli arrived, and they managed to sort that out very quickly. And that's something they have in their repertoire with Riyadh season. If there are late problems, they will get sorted out. You know, if somebody pulls out, somebody will be found to replace them because they've got the resources to make that happen, basically. So that added some real kind of spice to the week. But I mean, it was disappointing that we didn't get to see Dubois against Parker, because I was really looking forward to that. The fights were really, really good, I thought. I thought they were really good. They delivered in maybe slightly different ways to how we thought they would. I thought Callum Smith-Buatsi would be good, and it was absolutely outstanding. I thought Madrimov Ortiz would be better than it was. So you kind of got a bit more than maybe you expected with one and a bit less with another one. Like Zhile Zhang against Kabayel was really interesting while it lasted. Padley did great against Shakur Stevenson, which if you're neutral in that one or a Shakur Stevenson fan, you might not have been the most enthralling watch. But for us, it was good, wasn't it? Because you're watching this guy just hang with one of the best around. Parker, Bacoli, again, while it lasted, quite a lot happened. You know, Bacoli was doing quite well, actually. And then all of a sudden he got caught. Shiraz against Adamez was kind of frustrating. I didn't know at the time that Hamza had broken his hand, but still I feel like if he'd gone for it more, he could have won that fight, and you know, he'll learn loads from that. And then the top of the card was just absolutely supersonic. Those two are just hilariously good. And watching them both from ringside in both of those two fights, I mean, it's just stuff that you dream about, to be honest, because they are so good in every single aspect. And they're a class act when you see them around. They're interesting to talk to. All right, Better Biev doesn't say all that much, but he does it quite knowingly. He knows that it's a bit of a joke, that he just says, we'll see to everything. But that answer itself is quite revealing because, like I said, when you're talking to really top guys, and it was the same with Fury and Usyk, they won't play that game and give predictions and say, I'll do this and I'll do that. They'll just say to you, listen, I've trained really hard for this, but so has he. We're the best two in the division. When that bell goes, neither one of us knows what is going to happen, but it's going to be a good fight. And that's all they'll commit to because that's all they can. That's all they can. They're not into the hype. They're not into the bullshit. They're not even Fury. You know, Fury says all sorts of things, but before those fights against Usyk, that's what he said. I remember he said to me during the week, he said, listen, all I know is that I'm not afraid and nor is he. And when you've got two fighters who aren't afraid, you're going to have a good fight. And I love that. I love that. I know we need people like Eubank and Benn to sell fights in the way that they have, but you can't have everybody be like Better Biev and Bivol in terms of the way they approach it and their boxing personality, if you like. But it's good to have a mixture. It's good to have a mixture. And it's not a bad thing if the people right at the very top, like they are, conduct themselves in the way that they do.
I mean, I've been following those two since 2016. So for me, like I was 16 since I found out about them. I was always enthralled by them. I remember it was Beterbiev, Bivol, and Gvozdyk at the time, where those were the three. And I wanted to see a round robin of all three of them fighting each other. And then when you watched Beterbiev and Gvozdyk, it was like, that was top quality fighting. It felt proper, like high level. And then, you know, years later down the line, we finally got Beterbiev and Bivol. And again, it's to me, it seemed like a callback to Canelo and Triple G in terms of the high level and what was at stake as well. And how close both fights were, how they inspired controversy in both fights in terms of how people scored it. And how, you know, like it literally is, rather than number one and number two, it's more number 1A and number 1B. And at the time, either one could leapfrog the other. So I was just enthralled by both fights. I was happy. I was so happy when the first fight happened because I've been waiting. I think like at least 8 years for that fight, and I just finally when it happened, the nerves were kind of kicking in. Even though I'm not fighting, I'm just sitting and watching it from home. And then when it ended, it kind of felt I needed more. Like in terms of I need more rounds. I didn't want it to end. Even now, I think there has to be a third fight.
There has to be. There has to be. And I think it'll be really good again. I think people will probably make Bivol not a strong favourite, but I'd say that he would be installed as favourite because he won the second fight. And he's the younger guy, and Beterbiev is getting older. That's just a simple fact. And maybe Bivol was able to just raise it to that level where at the age Beterbiev is, and we're talking fractions here. People talk about fighters getting old overnight, like, you know, it's like some old tractor and the wheels fall off. It doesn't need to be that. It can be just a fractional slip, or your opponent can raise it to a level just a fraction higher than you can really sustain.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Bivol managed to do when he kind of wrestled the fight back off him in the second half. But that's why it was so good, because it toed and froed, and in the same way that first Fury Usyk fight did. Really, really good fights. You're either looking for an amazing performance from someone like Crawford against Spence, for example, in a fight where we thought that would be close, or you're looking for a ding dong where the pendulum swings. And it doesn't have to be carnage. That's a different kind of fight, but they were just so well matched that I do think the third fight will be really, really good, because I think Beterbiev will be going away right now brooding about the fact that he lost that fight, knowing that, okay, he did become undisputed in the first fight, but if he ends up losing 2-1, he will go down as history as being the number 2 of that era, and he can't have that.
Yeah.
And nor can Bivol.
Yeah, and it's interesting because obviously now they've ordered Bivol to fight Benavidez, so it'll be interesting to see how these next couple of months will go, because obviously
it will. But with stuff like that, I always thought that if they did go for a third fight, that all the belts wouldn't be in it, and it doesn't matter, because they've both become undisputed. They both got that on the mantelpiece. They've both done it, so it doesn't matter if all the belts aren't in the third fight. It's just not important. And actually, it's probably quite a good thing for the division, to be honest. Give other people a chance to box for them, because I've never been dead set against having 4 versions of the world title. You maybe don't need 4. 3 might be enough. But having more than 1, I think, is good, because people get opportunities. People talk about the old days of one title, like there were these halcyon days where everything was brilliant and fair. And, if you earned your opportunity, you got your shot. It just wasn't like that. People got frozen out for all sorts of different reasons. And loads of really good fighters never got the chance to box for a world title and therefore never really made that much money. Whereas now you can. And these two guys have had these belts, all 4 belts, for a long time. So yeah, free a couple up. Why not? You know, no one's confused about who the best 2 in the division are. No one's going to think David Benavidez is the number 1 because or Callum Smith is because those 2 fight and one of them beats the other one. It just doesn't matter. It just doesn't. So they can do whatever they like with the belts. And I'm pretty sure Better Biev and Bivol will be thinking that as well. Just let's do it one more time. And in the meantime, the sanctioning bodies can do whatever they feel is best.
You're preaching to the choir. Like I really want to see that 3rd fight, especially sooner rather than later.
Oh, it needs to happen now because, as we've been saying, like he's still at a phenomenal level, Better Biev, but I don't think it'll help him if it doesn't happen definitely before the end of the year.
Yeah. No, 100%. Yeah. Look, thank you so much for giving me so much of your time. I really appreciate it. I mean, talking to you is so fun, picking your brain about boxing and all the things that you've seen, but also the things that you've analyzed. We really appreciate it. And I've really enjoyed this interview with you. So thank you for your time. For those of you that are listening or watching, make sure you subscribe and you like, and also let us know your thoughts in the comments as well. And Andy's social media are all in the description below, and also the link to buy the knockout. So make sure you buy a copy. But again, Andy, thank you so much for giving us your time. And everyone else, like I said, I'm always going to keep bringing guests on, going to keep bringing people on, because at the end of the day, this is a discussion and it's a journey towards getting the sport to become a bit more relatable to the fans. So thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you in the next stream. Peace, guys.